Today, I'm going to be teaching you the secrets behind my melodies that have been used by artists like Future, 21 Savage, SZA, Lil Tjay, and so many more. I asked my community of over 26,000 producers what they need help on to level up their melodies. So in this video, I'm going to be answering all of your questions on how to make better melodies, and I'm going to actually cook up a melody from scratch to kind of demo all these tips that I'm talking about and show you guys how to make some hits. Anyways, let's dive right in. So the first question comes from my boy EQ. He said, what is the best way to brainstorm melody ideas when cooking from scratch? So I've definitely found that the most consistent way that works is just starting with chords, because once you start with chords, you can build on top of the chords and make everything sound super cohesive. But something I've been liking to do recently actually is to start with some kind of vocal or cool melodic phrase and then build the chords around that so that they match perfectly with the main lead melody, the main star of the show. So to get some inspiration, I'm going to go over here into the Melody Mastery Demo Kit, which is 100% free. Link is in the description if you guys want to buy that, but I'll talk about that more later. And I'm going to go to the vocal section and just try to find a vocal that kind of catches my attention. All right, so I kind of like this one. It's got like this like
give God the glory,
trap kind of vibe to it almost. And then also I play everything in C minor personally, so I'm going to pitch this vocal sample down 3 so that it's playing in C minor so I can play comfortably in the scale that I always use.
Holy, holy, pray for my enemies. Give God the glory, pray for what I can see. I'm family over everything. Holy, holy, pray for my
Cool, so right now, like, I got a super solid start. For this next question, I got one from my boy Moon Switch, and it's how to choose the right inversions for chords. Definitely, this is something that kind of just comes with time and like training your ear enough to be able to hear what are the right inversions, the right notes to choose on your chords. One tip that is very essential that I think a lot of people should keep in mind is you want to try to keep the notes as close together as possible. If you picture someone actually playing the piano, right? If I had 2 chords, one right here, and then one right here, right? It wouldn't really make sense to play them so far apart. So what a professional piano player would do is they would play those 2 chords, but they would play them with different inversions so that they're just closer together. They play it more like this. Right? Same 2 chords, but it sounds a lot more natural because all the notes are pretty similar and close together. So if we look at this pattern, right, you can see that this main 3-note chord is going on the whole time, and it's really just like bass notes and top notes that are changing. And this makes the progression feel like more like it's like got a home base that it stays, which may or may not be the vibe you're going for. So another thing that you can do is you can mess around with the top line melodies. I might want to mess around with inverting these notes like that, and then maybe inverting these up higher so that they're more in a similar range. Let's put these back down to thicken it up.
Holy, holy, pray for my enemies. Give God the glory, pray for what I can see.
Right? Like that sounds a little bit more attention grabbing. I might still put that down an octave.
Holy, holy, pray for my enemies.
But this is more or less the same chord progression, just with different inversions.
Give God the glory, pray for what I can see.
And listen to how different it sounds compared to this.
I made it out alive, I'm a living dream.
It's just got a very different tone to it, even though it's the exact same notes, just playing in different octaves. So I just kind of mess around with it like that. All right, so at this point, I got a nice, solid foundation.
Pray for my enemies. Give God the glory, pray for what I can see. I made it out alive, I'm a living dream. I do it for the ones I love.
I feel like it's giving the vocal a nice amount of space. And while we're on the topic of chords, I got another question from my boy Lysalone, and he asked, how many different chords do you use for a specific genre? Do you ever feel like you're making the same loop over and over? I 100% feel like I'm making the same loop over and over all the time, because I find personally, I don't think that having next level and like completely different chord progressions is the way that you're going to have loops that stand out. It's more the sound selection and how you use the chord progressions that matter. So I can't even tell you how many loops I've used the same 2 chords, but they sound sound completely different because I've used different sound selection. I've played them in different rhythms, different voicings. I use a different style of vocal or a different instrument as the lead line. So I think it's a lot more about sound selection and having good, unique sounds. All right, so the next thing I'm gonna do is just kind of add a little bit of effects to this vocal. I got this preset chain. That's some sauce for you guys who want to be able to work a little bit faster. Whenever you make a fire preset chain, just save it. Just like that, without having to actually manually load up those plugins and tweak the presets. And now I can go in and just like be like, oh, I want a little bit less reverb, a little bit less of an EQ. All right, I got a little idea. One thing I'm a big fan of is utilizing the sounds that you do have instead of just adding a ton of sounds that you don't need to add. So one thing I'm gonna do to just make this pad a little bit more interesting and also add some rhythm to it without even really doing too much is I'm gonna actually slide the pitch down of these chords with my MIDI keyboard. Just slide the pitch wheel. All right, next up, Jag asked, how do you make yourself stand out and be unique without making whack melodies that are too experimental? How do you find the balance? So I got a couple things to say on this. First thing kind of goes back to chord progressions. Using chord progressions that are proven to work, but then just changing the sounds that are typically used with that progression. Like let's say you're using the typical Lil Baby chord progression that has been used a million times, right? It sounds super played out whenever you use the exact same piano and violin that almost all of his songs were using back in 2020, 2021. But if you take that same progression that you know that Lil Baby likes, and then you use some brand new sounds that haven't been really introduced to his kind of world, then you can kind of bridge the gap between unique and new stuff with stuff that's proven to work. I think where stuff can get too experimental is when you're trying to reinvent the wheel with chord progressions and sound design at the same time. I feel like you kind of got to choose one or the other, but if I had to choose one, I think sound design and just like having good quality instruments, good quality sounds and all that is more important than all the crazy music theory behind switching it up with really weird chords and all that. And speaking of unique and super high quality sounds, like I mentioned earlier, I just dropped the Melody Mastery demo pack, which is completely free, so you can go download that, the first link in the description. But inside of here, we have a bunch of real instrument phrases from my analog synths and guitar pedals, along with those vocals like the one that we're using in this loop right now, presets, and all this stuff that's gonna make sound selection super easy because it's all only good go-to sounds in here. So again, 100% free. Go check it out before I drop the full version of Melody Mastery. Just click that link in the description to get the free sounds. I think there's over 100 free sounds in there, so definitely worth checking out. The next question comes from my boy Ryan, and he asks, can you show some nice ways to flip phrases and stuff without hardware? So if you don't know, recently I've gotten into guitar pedals and I've been flipping like phrases and stuff that I've made and putting them through guitar pedals. So I'm gonna try to think of some unique ways that you could flip phrases and stuff and make it fit better in a loop. Because I feel like sometimes, right, if I just drag in a random phrase with really no thought to it and I just drag this in without tweaking anything, it might sound kind of cool with the loop, but it might just like not work perfectly, right? Like I kind of like those sounds together, but I feel like it doesn't sound like it's one idea yet, right? So the first thing is just choosing a good phrase. So I might go through and just get a couple more options. Sometimes something I like to do is I like to drag in every single option of a phrase or a vocal that I think could work in a loop, and then kind of go process of elimination and listen to all of them with the loop and then choose the one that sticks with me the most. All right, so I got a bunch of phrases right here from the Melody Mastery kit. I'm gonna just drag them all on time. And now I'm just gonna kind of listen to them with the loop, put them all in the same key and BPM, and then see which ones fit the closest without having to do anything to them first. This one sounds kind of cool, but I feel like it's kind of a little too much. That could sound cool maybe right here. I kind of like that. I'm going to delete those ones that I don't think really fit just perfectly. And now it's about kind of fitting the phrase in. I like to be very intentional with how I use the phrases so that it sounds like it's supposed to be in the melody. Like right now, these two together are kind of clashing, all right? Like it sounds like there's two top line ideas going on at once. So the first thing that I would do to make sure that they just don't clash at all is I would just make sure that they're not playing at the same time. So we have the first section with the vocal, and then the next section comes with the synths. And then another thing I like to do, and I might experiment with making these fit together, is actually half speeding the phrase. I feel like sometimes the phrases are too busy whenever you combine it with other elements of the loop. So if you half speed it, it lowers the octave and it slows it down, and it just like opens up more space. So half speeding can make it feel a lot more cohesive, I feel like. And then for this B section where the vocal drops out, I feel like I can get a little bit busier with the phrases and stuff. So I might go in and try to flip some other phrases on top of that. And then I might also reverse it. And then one thing that I really like doing is adding guitar pedals to sounds that aren't guitars. I don't know, it makes it sound super processed. I like it. Now I'm just gonna build it out with a few more sounds. All right, so I added a few more sounds. One cool sound that I added was this little soundscape from Melody Mastery. This is in the free version. It's just a repetitive, like, textural kind of sound. And then I got a lead melody in my head that I want to kind of play on this. I'm gonna try to find a lead sound real quick. All right, the next set of questions, I got one from the one, how to stand out from the thousands of producers. So I think one is, I feel like people really underestimate the amount of time it takes to become exceptional. And I feel like the biggest ingredient that most producers are making with their melodies to stand out is they just haven't been making them long enough and the quality is just not there yet. I think there's a sea of producers who are good. I think there is very little amount of people who are actually like mind-blowing, super, super amazing at making melodies. And I feel like once you get to that level, that's where it's easier to find success and stand out from the crowd. And then the next question I got is from Kello. He says, how do you give your sounds unique texture and character? And then also kind of a similar question, is sound designing needed to be a unique sample maker? So I kind of want to answer these both at the same time. I feel like sound design, like actually like being in the synthesizer and like making your own sounds is not necessary to be a unique sound designer. It does help a lot, but I think that you can do a lot of sound designing with effects. For example, this lead that I just put down sounds really cool, but I feel like it sounds like a VST still, right? Typically what I've been doing recently is I'll take that and then I'll put it through my guitar pedals, saturate it up, dirty it up a little bit to make it sound more analog, and then I'll send it back in here as a recorded audio file. But I know that a lot of you guys don't have guitar pedals to be using, so let me show you how to make this sound more analog in the box without any hardware equipment. So to make this lead kind of sound a little bit more analog, the first thing I like to do, which I did earlier on that piano phrase, is add like some kind of guitar amp. Sometimes can get that sound. And I really like to turn up the distortion and get it kind of crunchy. And then another thing you can do with sound design that's super, super easy with effects to just make something that's like not so interesting sound very interesting is adding a very good like analog delay. And then I'll show you a little sauce with this knob right here. So we're gonna start with H delay. We got this, right? But the first thing that I'm gonna wanna do is maybe change this time a little bit. Make it a little bit longer. And then also I can EQ the delay. So I'm just gonna allow a little bit of frequencies to be delayed. But the real sauce is this modulation knob on H delay. So if I turn this depth knob up, it's going to increase the pitch modulation and give it this like weird delay effect. Which sounds way too crazy right now, right? But you turn it down a little bit. And then turn the mix down just a little bit. And here's one quick little tip. Whenever you have a sound that sounds really cool and you want to keep it in the loop, but like it just sounds like kind of off time no matter what you do to it, one thing I like doing is adding a sidechain effect. All right, so I got this like soundscape one shot with the guitar is like not really on time. All right, it's not like that bad, but it's kind of throwing my groove off a little bit. So what I do is I put on the Shaper Box plugin with this trim setting, set it to a half bar, so it's gonna duck the volume at the end of every half bar. And with the mix up 100%, it sounds like this, right? Which is setting it on grid a little bit more. There's like that like choppy rhythm to it, but I want it to be a little bit more flowy, so I just turned down to like half. One little thing I might do to incorporate the vocal sample throughout the loop and make it sound like cohesive, like there's a theme, is I might just like copy and paste this little family over everything. I like finding little parts of a vocal chop that's like the catchy part and just repeat that one little chop. Let's see if it ends up working. And I might add like a lot more reverb to that, a lot more delay to make it kind of stand out from the normal one. All right, next question comes from my boy Vault Music. He asks, what are industry producers actually looking for when they're listening to a sample? So I think the first thing that's most important is the first like 2-3 seconds have got to grab their attention. If you've been in the room with people in studio sessions, you know if they have like a pack of loops to go through that they're about to cook up on, or even artists with beats, they will listen to like 2 or 3 seconds, and if it doesn't catch their ear right away, they skip forward. So I tend to put my most interesting part right away, even if I don't necessarily think it should be arranged that way in a final song, just so it catches their attention. And then other than that, I feel like it depends on the person. There are people who are very specific. They want a very specific type of loop because they have like a specific opportunity. And then there's people who just kind of cook up whatever. But I think the general consensus with most of the music industry people that I talk to is you want to give them usable stuff. So stuff that is like familiar enough that it's easy to use, but it has like a little bit of a different flavor. It's not like the same exact thing that they're getting sent by a million other people. So overall, I feel like my advice with a lot of stuff, not just loops, is like make your stuff like 15-20% different from everyone else's. And then another great plugin is the Cluster Flux by Moog. And this is like an analog chorus, but it just makes it sound so like analog. Might also add that Moger Foger pedal onto the lead. And one question I see all the time is like, how do you make complex loops that are still easy to use? Like this question here by my boy Valentine, he asked, what are the best ways to add additional melodies and counter melodies without overcomplicating things? One of the core things is, especially with chords, you can add a lot of layers playing the same chords, and it's not going to sound too crowded most of the time if you choose the right sounds and stuff like that, because they're all working together playing the same thing. The places that people run into problems with overcomplicating stuff and making it too complex to use is when, you know, you've got this lead vocal melody and then you try to put the lead on top of there, and then you try to put on this like guitar soundscape and this reverse piano. Like if we listen to all these top line melody elements, you can hear how clustered it's going to sound, right? Just sounds like there's just way too much going on. So like I mentioned earlier, the first thing that you could do to just guarantee that they're not going to clash is to keep them in separate sections. This first section has this little phrase, but it's barely playing a melody. The vocal takes all the space for the main melody. And then we have the chords with the pad, right? So nothing is really competing for space right here. We got this little perk loop. And then right here, that very prominent vocal melody that is a super like lead melody drops out. And then we go into a B section that comes in with a whole new lead melody. So this section of the loop is the same chords, virtually the same idea, just with a different top line melody and some more elements that come in whenever this lead melody comes out. And that makes this B section feel like a different part of the loop. It doesn't just sound like, you know, we have this first section, and then let's say I kept it pretty much the same and I just brought in a bass for the second B section, right? It's not bad, but it's just not as interesting. You want to make your different sections of the loop all sound like different sections of a song, right? Like this would be like a hook. High energy, right? Then it drops out into a verse right here. There's no lead melody that's taking up a lot of room. So overall, I think the biggest thing you could do is just spacing out the melody ideas in your arrangement, and then also just making sure that stuff is cohesive. So I'm going to try to layer in a new sound, but it's going to be playing the same chords as the first pad. So it's not going to be competing as much because it's playing the same thing. And then I might just make the pattern slightly different. All right, so this loop is pretty much done, so this question seems fitting. How long does it take on average to make a fully finished loop? This really depends on me, on the complexity of the loop. Whenever I'm making these like more typical kind of loops, I would say anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour is about what I would spend. Most of that time is tweaking sounds, tweaking the mix, adding like unique effects to try to kind of elevate the sound, make it sound a little bit more unique. And I would say like less than half of the time is actually composing the melodies and like writing the melodies. Like I get most of the melodies and the sounds down in like the first 15-20 minutes, and then from there it's just like arranging stuff, making sure everything fits together, making sure every section is simple and all of that. And then whenever I'm doing super complex samples like gospel choir samples, or ones where I'm going back and forth with session musicians to like bring this crazy idea to life, those ones can take like 3 or 4 hours. All right, to finish this off, I think I'm just gonna copy it over and then like make like a few more sections just so that there's a lot of variety. And I'm gonna take the vocal out right there. This could be like second half of the verse, pitch it down and then filter it out a little bit just so it's there, but it's just like a little bit more chill for this part compared to the hook part where it's super in your face. All right, so the melody's pretty much done, so I think that this question is pretty fitting for my boy Lice Alone again. What are the most crucial steps to take to make the loops as easy to use as possible? This is a great question and something that I obsess with. A lot of loop makers kind of neglect the drum maker who's actually going to be flipping, like, you know, buying your sample packs and using them in beats, right? So a lot of sample makers will just send this out as is, which, you know, already it's got a lot of sections. So that's nice that it has a bunch of different variety for the drum maker to choose from, so they could just chop up the loop and kind of sample it just like the one track. But it goes a step further. What I love to do is stem it out. So the way that I stem it out is I just copy over all the layers and then I put a 4-bar space in between each one of the layers. So once I have it arranged out like that with 4 bars in between each stem, what I then do is grab a hi-hat sound or just some kind of drum sound, and I will just put it in between each one of those 4-bar sections. Shout out Cody, I learned this from him. Essentially just skip 2 bars, put the hi-hat, and then there's a 2-bar space on either side of the hi-hat. And you might be wondering why you put a hi-hat, but if you bounce down the loop, I will show you. Whenever the drum maker opens up the file, they get these big clicks in the audio file, right? So they can just chop the loop right there, and then automatically all the stems are going to be perfectly in time with each other if you just drag them like that. So it takes the guesswork out for the drum maker on where the stems are supposed to be arranged. They can just chop out that hi-hat hit right there, and then all the stems are perfectly playing together. And then after that, the next thing that I do whenever I export the loop, I also export the bass MIDI. So I export this as a MIDI file that I send out with the loop, so that whoever gets the loop has the stems, the full arrangement that I did, and then they also have the notes that they should use for their bass line or 808 preset out for them. And you might be thinking that's way too easy. This just saves them time and it just makes it easier to use your stuff. And then another thing that I do to make sure that my loops are very easy to use and that really gives me some clarity on if I'm doing too much in a loop or if I'm not doing enough and some part feels empty. So I like to put test drums just to kind of get the bounce and see how it would sound when someone puts down some simple drums. Because if it sounds good with my simple shitty ass mid drums, it's going to sound really good with someone who knows what they're doing. So this is where the bass MIDI would come in handy, right? Like I don't feel like sitting there and remembering all the bass notes I played. I just copy in the bass MIDI right here. So when I'm listening to this, I can hear that the pad has a lot of like low mid frequencies that are gonna clash whenever someone has drums. So I might just do the work for them a little bit. And now I'm gonna go and test those drums on the different sections. All right, so the lead sounds too loud. When I'm listening to the melody by itself, it doesn't sound too loud. I might turn down all the melody sounds. The problems that I'm running into whenever I'm like arranging a full beat on the sample, I try to fix those issues in the sample so that the drum maker doesn't even have to think about it. All right, real quick, I'm gonna play the whole entire sample with those little demo test drums through. But real quick, if you liked that melody, you liked how that came out, make sure to go check out the free Melody Mastery demo pack. Almost all the sounds that I used in that melody were from the demo pack. So definitely go check that out and stay tuned for the full Melody Mastery drop on January 24th. Anyways, let's hear this final beat. Interesting section in the beginning. Energy changes on the B section.